The blue light of distant stars filtered through the observation deck as Rix adjusted his feathered wings for the 100th time that day. His species had evolved from peaceful birds on Centauri Prime, and sitting still for long periods made his hollow bones ache. He had been watching the edge of human space for 3 weeks now, documenting their expansion patterns for the Galactic Council. Humans fascinated the Council. They were one of the newest species to achieve interstellar travel, yet they spread across systems faster than anyone expected. Unlike other species that took centuries to establish a single colony, humans seemed to plant settlements everywhere they went. Rix's job was simple: watch and record. Nothing more. His partner Kale, a gentle creature from the water world of Aquarius, floated in his specialized tank nearby. "Any movement today?" Kale asked through the water-filled speech device that bubbled with each word. "3 new ships heading toward the outer rim," Rix replied, making notes on his datapad. They never stopped moving. Their small observation post hung in empty space hidden behind an asteroid field. It was designed to be invisible, a perfect hiding spot for peaceful researchers. Rix felt safe here, surrounded by the familiar hum of life, support systems, and the quiet beeping of sensors. That feeling of safety shattered when the proximity alarm started. Screaming, unknown vessels approaching. "Fast," announced their ship's computer in its calm, automated voice. Multiple contacts. Weapons detected. Rix's blood turned cold. His species had not seen war for over 1,000 years. They had no weapons, no shields, no way to fight back. Their ship was built for observation, not combat. "Can we run?" Kale asked, his usually calm voice filled with panic. Rix looked at the sensor readings and felt his heart sink. "They're too fast, and there are too many of them." The attacking ships came into view through the observation windows. They were ugly, brutal-looking vessels covered in spikes and armor plating. Rix recognized them immediately from Council intelligence reports. Floodclaw raiders. The Bloodclaws were one of the most feared pirate groups in the galaxy. They came from a world where only the strongest survived, and they treated other species like property. They captured ships, stole cargo, and sold prisoners as slaves to anyone willing to pay. "This is Commander Grex of the Bloodclaw fleet." A harsh voice crackled over their communication system. "Surrender now or we will tear your ship apart." Rix looked at Kale, then at their 2 other crew members, a pair of insect-like beings from the hive worlds. They were scientists, not soldiers. They had no choice. "We surrender," Rix said into the communicator, his voice shaking. The next few hours were a nightmare. Bloodclaw boarding parties forced their way onto the observation post, using cutting tools to slice through the airlock. The raiders were massive reptilian creatures with sharp claws and rows of pointed teeth. They wore crude armor and carried weapons that looked like they were designed to cause as much pain as possible. They dragged Rix and his crew onto their main ship without ceremony. The Bloodclaw vessel was a converted cargo hauler that had been turned into a mobile fortress. The walls were covered in scratches and stains that Rix did not want to identify. The air smelled of blood and fear. Commander Grex was even larger than his soldiers, with scars covering his dark green hide. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding metal. "Peaceful little birds," he said, looking at Rix with yellow eyes. "Perfect for what we have planned. What do you want from us?" Rix asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Grex laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Entertainment. We have been hunting in human space for weeks now. Caught ourselves quite a collection of their kind. Soft little mammals just like you." The commander led them through the ship's corridors. Other Bloodclaws stopped their work to stare at the new prisoners. Some licked their lips. Others made comments in their harsh language that needed no translation. "You see," Grex continued, "humans are supposed to be fierce fighters. That's what we heard anyway. But so far they just cry and beg like all the other weak species. Very disappointing." They reached a large cargo hold that had been converted into something horrible. Arena seating had been built around a circular fighting pit. The floor was stained dark and crude weapons hung from racks on the walls. Above the pit, chains hung from the ceiling where prisoners could be suspended to watch the fights below. "Welcome to our entertainment center," Grex said with pride. "We make different species fight each other for our amusement. Bets are placed. Blood is shed. Good times for everyone." Rix felt sick. His people had heard stories of such places, but he had never believed they really existed. "This is barbaric," he whispered. "This is profitable," Grex corrected. "And educational. We learn about each species by watching how they fight, how they break, how they die." Bloodclaw soldiers chained Rix and his crew to the viewing platforms above the arena. The chains were heavy and cold against his feathered skin. From this position, they would be forced to watch everything that happened below. "The humans fight tomorrow," Grex announced. "We have 12 of them now. Should be quite a show. They keep talking about dignity and honor. But we will see how long that lasts when they are bleeding." As night fell on the ship, Rix hung in his chains and tried not to think about what would happen the next day. His crew members were silent, lost in their own fear. In the distance, he could hear human voices coming from the holding cells. They were talking quietly among themselves, but he could not make out the words. One voice stood out from the others. It was calm and steady, like someone giving orders or making plans. Rix wondered who it belonged to and what kind of person could stay so composed in such a terrible situation. He would find out soon enough. The arena lights dimmed, leaving the prisoners in darkness. Somewhere in that darkness, humans were preparing for a fight they never asked for, and Rix was going to be forced to watch every moment of it. Sleep did not come easily that night. When it finally did, Rix dreamed of blood and screaming and yellow eyes that watched everything with cruel amusement. He had no idea that his nightmares were nothing compared to what he would witness in the days to come. Dawn came too quickly aboard the Bloodclaw ship. Rix had managed only a few hours of restless sleep before the arena lights blazed to life below him. The chains around his wrist had rubbed his feathers raw during the night, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the dread in his chest. Bloodclaw spectators began filing into the arena seating, carrying bottles of some foul-smelling alcohol and making loud bets on the coming fights. Their excited chatter filled the air with a sound like grinding metal. Rix tried to close his eyes, but one of the guards hit the chain above his head with a metal rod. "Eyes open, bird," the guard snarled. "Boss wants you to see everything." The first human was brought out from the holding cells. He was a young man, maybe 25 years old by human standards, with brown hair and scared eyes. He wore the simple clothes of a merchant or colonist. His hands shook as the Bloodclaws shoved him into the arena pit. "First fighter," Commander Grex announced to the crowd. "Human male. Caught him running supplies to a human colony. Claims he has never hurt anyone in his life." The crowd laughed and jeered. Weapons were thrown into the pit. Crude knives, clubs, and pieces of sharp metal. The young human looked at them like they were poisonous snakes. "Second fighter," Grex continued. "Also human. This one was traveling with the merchant. Says they are friends." The second human was an older woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She was probably someone's grandmother. The thought made Rix feel even sicker. "Fight," Grex commanded. "Winner gets to live another day. Loser feeds the recyclers." Both humans stood frozen in the center of the pit. They looked at each other with horror, then up at the bloodthirsty crowd above them. "I cannot do this," the young man said to the woman. "I cannot hurt you." "And I cannot hurt you, David," the woman replied. "There must be another way." The Bloodclaws began throwing things into the pit. Chunks of metal, empty bottles, anything they could find. "Fight, or we throw you both to the void," Grex shouted. That was when the third human spoke up. "David, listen to me." The voice came from the holding area where the remaining humans were kept. Rix could see him now, a man in his 30s with short black hair and scars on his arms. Unlike the others, he did not look afraid. He looked angry. "Who dares speak without permission?" Grex demanded. "I am Dan Reed," the scarred man said calmly, "former sergeant in the Human Colonial Defense Force, and I am telling you right now that your little show is about to change." The crowd fell silent. Even Grex seemed surprised by the human's bold tone. "You want to see humans fight?" Dan continued. "Then fight me. Let these civilians go and put me in there with whoever you think is your best." Grex's yellow eyes gleamed with interest. A soldier. Much better than merchants and grandmothers. He gestured to his guards. "Bring the military human down. Let him show us what human warriors can do." They dragged Dan into the pit and unchained David and the older woman. But instead of taking them away, Grex left them in the arena as well. "Change of plans," the commander announced. "The soldier fights both civilians. Let us see if human loyalty survives when death is on the line." Dan picked up one of the crude knives and tested its weight. His movements were precise and controlled, nothing like the panicked gestures of the other two humans. "David Ann," he said quietly to his fellow prisoners, "I need you to listen very carefully to what I am about to tell you." The Bloodclaws expected to see the soldier turn on the civilians. Rix expected the same thing. But what happened next would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. Dan began teaching them how to fight. Right there in the arena, with hundreds of bloodthirsty pirates watching, he showed David how to hold a knife properly. He demonstrated basic footwork to Anne. He explained how to watch an opponent's eyes to predict their moves. "You are not trying to kill them," Dan said to the crowd, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "You are trying to create a show, so let me give you one." What followed was not a fight. It was a training session disguised as combat. Dan would attack David slowly, showing him how to block. He would grapple with Anne gently, teaching her how to break free. All the while, he kept up a running commentary for the confused audience. "Humans do not fight like animals," Dan explained as he dodged a clumsy swing from David. "We learn. We adapt. We get better." The bloodclaws began to grow restless. This was not the blood-soaked spectacle they had paid to see. "Enough games," Grex roared. "Kill them or we kill all three of you." Dan looked up at the commander with cold eyes. "You want blood? Fine, but remember you asked for this." The change in Dan was instant and terrifying. One moment he was a patient teacher, the next he was a killing machine. He moved faster than Rix thought possible, spinning and striking with the precision of a trained killer, but instead of attacking David and Anne, he went after the arena itself. Dan used his knife to cut strips of leather from the weapon rack padding. He tied them around his hands for better grip. He grabbed a metal rod and tested it as a weapon. In minutes he had turned random arena props into a small arsenal. "What is he doing?" one of the bloodclaws asked nervously. "He is showing you what a human soldier looks like when he stops pretending to be civilized," Dan replied. The demonstration that followed made Rix understand why humans had spread across the galaxy so quickly. Dan moved through a series of combat exercises, showing attacks and defenses that were clearly designed for killing. His movements were fluid and deadly, like a predator that had evolved for warfare. But the most frightening part was how he kept teaching the others. Even while displaying his own combat skills, Dan continued to instruct David and Anne. He showed them how to use their environment as a weapon, how to fight as a team, how to turn their fear into anger and their anger into strength. By the end of the first day, 2 terrified civilians had become something else. They still looked like ordinary humans, but there was something different in their eyes, something that made Rick shiver despite himself. As the arena lights dimmed and the prisoners were returned to their cells, Rix heard Dan talking quietly to the other humans in the holding area. "Tomorrow they will bring more of us down," he was saying. "When they do, remember what you learned today. Remember that we are not victims. We are humans, and humans do not go quietly into the dark." Hanging in his chains above the empty arena, Rix realized that something terrible was beginning. The bloodclaws thought they were breaking human spirits. Instead, they were forging something much more dangerous. They were teaching humans how to be warriors. 5 days had passed since the first fight, and Rix no longer recognized the arena below him. What had started as a place of simple brutality had become something far more complex and terrifying. The bloodclaws had grown frustrated with their human prisoners. Instead of breaking down like other species, the humans were doing something unprecedented. They were organizing. Commander Grex paced the upper levels of the arena like a caged beast. 12 humans, he growled to his lieutenant. 12 soft mammals, and they have turned my arena into some kind of military academy. Rix could see what the commander meant. During each forced combat session, Dan continued his training program. The humans who entered the pit scared and helpless came out different. They moved with purpose now, watched their surroundings with calculating eyes, and most disturbing of all, they had begun to communicate without words. "Today we changed the rules," Grex announced to the assembled crowd. "No more one-on-one fights. No more training games. Today 6 humans enter the pit. Only 3 leave alive." The bloodthirsty cheers from the audience made Rix's feathers stand on end. His crewmate Kale made a sick gurgling sound in his water tank. Even the insect beings clicked their mandibles in distress. But when the humans were brought into the arena, Rix saw something that chilled him to his core. They were not afraid. 6 humans stood in the pit, looking up at hundreds of alien predators, and they showed no fear at all. Dan was among them, along with David and Anne from the first fight. The other 3 were newer prisoners: a young woman named Beth who had been captured from a mining station, an older man called Robert who claimed to be a teacher, and a teenage boy named Tim who had been traveling with his family before the Bloodclaws attacked their ship. 6 enter, 3 leave, Grex repeated. Choose who lives and who dies, or we choose for you. The weapons thrown into the pit were different this time. Real blades instead of scrap metal. Actual clubs instead of broken pipes. The Bloodclaws wanted serious violence, but instead of turning on each other, the humans did something that made Rix's blood freeze in his veins. They formed a circle. Back to back, the 6 humans stood in the center of the arena and began to speak in low voices. Rix strained to hear their words, but their conversation was too quiet for the watching crowd to follow. What are they doing? Grex demanded. The answer came quickly. Without warning, 3 of the humans collapsed to the ground. Anne, Robert, and Tim all fell down and lay perfectly still, as if they had suddenly died. The remaining 3 humans, Dan, David, and Beth, immediately began performing what looked like artificial respiration and first aid. They worked frantically as if trying to save their fallen companions. Medical emergency, Dan shouted up to the crowd. These 3 are sick. They need help. But Rix could see the truth that the Bloodclaws missed. The fallen humans were not sick or dying. Their breathing was controlled and steady. Their muscle tension was all wrong for unconsciousness. They were faking, and while the 3 survivors put on a show of trying to save their friends, they were actually doing something else entirely. Dan was using his position over Anne's body to study the arena's drain system. David was palming small pieces of metal while pretending to check Robert's pulse. Beth was mapping the positions of every guard while appearing to give Tim mouth-to-mouth. This is not a fight, Grex snarled. This is a trick. No trick, Dan called back, still working over Anne's motionless form. 3 of our people have collapsed. We request medical assistance. The Bloodclaw commander climbed down into the arena himself, his massive form casting a shadow over the humans. There is nothing wrong with them, he said, prodding Tim's body with his foot. That was when Anne struck. Moving faster than anyone expected, she grabbed Grex's ankle and twisted. The massive alien went down hard, his head striking the arena floor with a wet crack. Before any of the guards could react, all 6 humans were on their feet and moving, but they did not try to escape. Instead, they did something that would replay in Rix's nightmares for years to come. They began to systematically disassemble their captor. Working with the coordinated precision of a surgical team, the humans stripped Grex of his weapons, his armor, and his dignity. They did not kill him quickly. Instead, they demonstrated every combat technique Dan had taught them over the past week. David showed how to use pressure points to cause paralysis. Beth demonstrated joint manipulation that could dislocate bones without breaking them. Tim, the youngest, proved that size meant nothing when you understood leverage and anatomy. The arena fell silent except for Grex's screams. This is for every species you have tortured, Dan said calmly as he applied what looked like a basic medical hold, but was actually cutting off blood flow to the commander's brain. This is for everyone you have murdered for entertainment. And this, Anne added, taking one of Grex's own knives and holding it to his throat, is to show your people what happens when you mistake human mercy for weakness. But they did not kill him. Instead, they left him alive, broken and humiliated in the center of the arena. The Bloodclaw guards finally snapped out of their shock and began firing weapons into the pit. But the humans were ready for that too. They had used their fake medical emergency to position themselves near the arena's drainage covers. As energy blasts filled the air, all 6 humans disappeared down into the ship's waste management system. Alarms began blaring throughout the vessel. Emergency lights bathed everything in red. The Bloodclaws ran in circles, shouting orders and firing at shadows. From his position chained above the arena, Rix could see the truth that the pirates could not. The humans had not escaped in a panic. They had executed a carefully planned military operation, and it was just the beginning. Over the ship's communication system, Dan's voice echoed through every corridor and chamber. Attention, Bloodclaw crew. You wanted to see how humans fight. Consider this your education. We are no longer your prisoners. You are now our prey. The lights went out, plunging the arena into complete darkness. In that darkness, Rix heard sounds that would haunt him forever. Metal being torn apart, systems failing. And underneath it all, the coordinated movement of 6 humans who had transformed from victims into something far more dangerous. They had become hunters, and the hunt had only just begun. 3 weeks into their captivity, Rix had stopped counting the hours and started counting the screams. The Bloodclaw ship had become a floating nightmare, where hunters had become hunted. What the pirates thought would be a simple prisoner break had turned into something far worse. The 6 escaped humans had not tried to flee or hide. Instead, they had declared war on their captors. Emergency lighting cast everything in blood-red shadows. Half the ship's systems had been sabotaged or destroyed. The Bloodclaws who once swaggered through the corridors now moved in armed groups, jumping at every sound. From his chained position above the now empty arena, Rix had a perfect view of the main display screens that showed security feeds from throughout the ship. He watched in horrified fascination as the humans conducted what Dan called educational demonstrations for their former captors. The pirates had made a critical error. They assumed humans would behave like other prey species, run, hide, beg for mercy. Instead, they had awakened something primal and terrible. Sector 7 is secure, David's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. The humans had taken control of the internal comms on day 2 of their revolt. Bloodclaw resistance neutralized. No casualties on our side. Commander Grex, still recovering from his injuries, limped onto the arena's upper deck. His once proud bearing was gone, replaced by the hunted look of a creature that no longer felt safe in its own territory. How? He demanded, staring at Rix as if the alien observer could somehow explain what was happening. How do 6 soft mammals control my ship? Rix wished he could not answer that question. But he had been forced to watch every moment of the human's transformation, and he understood things that the Bloodclaws could not. The humans had not just escaped. They had studied their prison during those first weeks of captivity, memorizing guard rotations, mapping air ducts, identifying critical systems. While the pirates thought they were breaking human spirits, the humans were gathering intelligence. More importantly, they had weaponized everything. The ship's ventilation system had become a highway for human movement. The waste recycling network now carried improvised explosives made from cleaning supplies. Even the food distribution system had been turned into a delivery method for sleep drugs stolen from the medical bay. But the most terrifying thing was how they had divided the labor. Dan handled strategy and leadership, coordinating their operations with military precision. David used his merchant background to understand the ship's supply lines and economic weak points. Anne, the grandmother, had become their intelligence chief, somehow knowing exactly where every Bloodclaw would be at any given moment. Beth had taken charge of psychological warfare, using the ship's communication system to broadcast sounds designed to keep their enemies awake and paranoid. Robert, the teacher, had become their technology expert, turning educational principles into methods for sabotaging complex systems. And Tim, the teenager, had evolved into something that made Rix's feathers stand on end. The boy moved through the ship like a ghost, appearing and disappearing at will. The Bloodclaws had started calling him the Shadow, and several had been found unconscious with no memory of how they had been attacked. They are not fighting like animals. Rix finally answered Grex's question. They are fighting like humans. What does that mean? The commander snarled. Before Rix could respond, the lights went out again. In the darkness, they heard the sound of metal being cut, followed by a wet thud and a Bloodclaw scream that cut off abruptly. When the emergency lighting returned, there was a new message written on the arena wall in what looked suspiciously like alien blood. Day 21, your move. The psychological warfare was working. Rix could see it in the way the remaining Bloodclaws flinched at shadows and startled at ordinary sounds. Fear was spreading through the pirate crew like a disease, but it was not random fear. The humans were being very selective about who they targeted and when. They had studied Bloodclaw social structure and identified the key individuals who held the organization together. They were systematically removing these people, not necessarily killing them, but taking them out of action in ways that maximized terror among the survivors. Status report. Dan's voice came over the communication system again. This time he sounded tired but not defeated. If anything, he sounded more determined than ever. Engineering section secured, came Beth's reply. Found the ship's main power core. Very interesting design. Medical bay is ours, reported Anne. Recovered additional supplies and identified 3 more pressure points in their command structure. Weapons locker emptied, Tim added with what sounded like dark amusement. Redistributed contents to strategic locations throughout the ship. Grex grabbed the communication device with shaking claws. "I offer you a deal," he broadcast. "Stop this madness and I will release you. Take a shuttle and go." The response came immediately, and it was not from Dan. It was from all 6 humans speaking in unison, their voices perfectly synchronized in a way that made Rix's skin crawl. "Negative. You wanted to see how humans fight. Class is still in session." That was when Rix realized the most horrible truth of all. The humans were not trying to escape anymore. They were not trying to survive. They were teaching. Every action they took was designed to demonstrate something about human capabilities to anyone watching. They were showing the galaxy what happened when you pushed humanity too far. They were creating a lesson written in blood and terror that would be remembered long after this ship was dust, and Rix was being forced to document every moment of his hidden personal log had become a record of humanity's true nature. Page after page of observations about human adaptability, creativity, and most frightening of all, their capacity for controlled violence. Other species fought when cornered. Humans planned wars. Other species sought escape when captured. Humans sought victory. Other species broke under torture. Humans learned from it and became stronger. "They are not like us," Rix whispered to himself as he updated his log. "They are apex predators who learned to use tools. And we invited them into our galaxy." The ship shuddered as something exploded deep in its hull. More alarms began wailing. Through the security feeds, Rix could see blood claws running in panic while 6 humans moved through the chaos with calm purpose. They were not monsters. That would have been easier to understand. Monsters were driven by hunger or rage or simple brutality. These were worse. These were intelligent, creative, determined people who had decided that their captors needed to be taught a lesson about the consequences of cruelty, and they were very, very good teachers. The end came on day 26, and it came with a precision that would forever change how Rix viewed the concept of mercy. The Bloodclaw ship had become a tomb. Of the original crew of 300 pirates, fewer than 50 remained functional. The rest were dead, unconscious, or had suffered what the humans clinically termed attitude adjustments. The ship itself was dying, its systems failing one by one as the humans methodically dismantled everything that kept it operational. But this was not random destruction. Every action served a purpose in what Dan had called the final examination. Rix watched through failing security cameras as the humans gathered in the ship's main cargo hold. They had spent the past week converting it into something that defied description. Part courtroom, part operating theater, part museum of horrors. The walls were covered with detailed diagrams showing bloodclaw anatomy, psychology, and social structure. Tables held improvised weapons that demonstrated increasingly sophisticated understanding of alien physiology. And in the center of it all stood a simple chair where Commander Grex now sat, bound and conscious. "Welcome to graduation day," Dan announced to the few surviving bloodclaws who had been herded into the room. His voice was calm, almost cheerful, but his eyes held something that made Rix want to look away. The 6 humans had changed over the past weeks. They still looked like the same people who had been dragged terrified into the arena, but everything else was different. They moved with the fluid coordination of a pack predator. They spoke in a shared vocabulary of violence and strategy. Most disturbing of all, they had developed what could only be called a professional appreciation for their work. "You wanted to understand how humans fight," Anne said, consulting a datapad filled with notes. "Today you get your final lesson." The surviving bloodclaws were arranged in a circle around their former commander. Rix realized this was no random cruelty. The humans had carefully studied their captors' social dynamics and chosen exactly the right audience for what was about to happen. "First demonstration," Beth announced, moving to stand beside Grex. "Human approaches to justice." What followed was not torture, though the results were similar. Instead, it was an educational lecture with live demonstrations. The humans had spent weeks learning exactly how their captors' bodies worked, what caused pain, what caused fear, and what caused lasting psychological damage. They used this knowledge with surgical precision. David showed how human understanding of pressure points could be applied to alien anatomy. Tim demonstrated techniques for sensory manipulation that could drive victims to madness without permanent physical harm. Robert explained the psychological principles behind effective interrogation, but it was Anne who provided the most chilling lesson of all. Your species believes strength comes from causing fear, she said, speaking directly to Grex while the other Bloodclaws watched in growing terror. Humans understand that true strength comes from controlling fear. She proceeded to demonstrate exactly what she meant, using nothing but words and careful manipulation of the room's lighting and sound systems, and reduced the massive alien commander to a whimpering wreck. She did not touch him. She did not threaten him. She simply spoke, describing in calm detail everything that had happened to his crew and everything that would happen to him. The other Bloodclaws began to break down before their leader did. One by one, they started begging for mercy, offering information, promising anything if the humans would just stop. Mercy, Dan repeated thoughtfully. Interesting concept. Let me show you how humans understand mercy. The demonstration that followed was perhaps the most terrifying thing Rix had ever witnessed, not because of its cruelty but because of its restraint. The humans could have killed every Bloodclaw on the ship. They had demonstrated that capability repeatedly over the past weeks. They could have tortured them, enslaved them, or simply left them to die as the ship's systems failed. Instead, they chose something far more frightening. They chose to let them live, but not unchanged. Working with the same methodical precision they had shown throughout their captivity, the humans began what they called corrective surgery. Using medical supplies stolen from the ship's infirmary, they performed procedures on each surviving Bloodclaw. Not procedures designed to harm or kill, but procedures designed to teach. They removed the claws that gave the species its name, explaining that weapons were privileges that had to be earned through civilized behavior. They implanted tracking devices that would allow human authorities to monitor the pirates for the rest of their lives. Most disturbing of all, they performed psychological conditioning that would make it impossible for any of these Bloodclaws to harm another sentient being. You are being given a gift, Dan explained to the terrified pirates as his team worked. The gift of a second chance. You will return to your home world. You will tell them what you learned here, and you will spend the rest of your lives proving that you understand the lesson. Commander Grex was saved for last. When the humans finally turned their attention to him, he was already broken. The psychological pressure had succeeded where physical torture would have failed. Please, he whispered, a sound Rix had never heard from the proud predator. Please, just kill me. Death is easy, Dan replied, kneeling beside the commander's chair. Learning is hard. You are going to learn. The procedure they performed on Grex was the most complex of all. When they were finished, the former pirate commander was physically intact, but fundamentally changed. His neural pathways had been rewired to make violence impossible. His hormone production had been altered to eliminate aggressive impulses. His memory centers had been modified to ensure he would never forget what had happened on this ship. You will return home, Anne explained as they released him from the chair. You will tell your people that humans are not prey. You will warn them that we remember every kindness and every cruelty, and you will spend every remaining day of your life working to repair the damage you have caused. The humans had turned their greatest enemy into their most effective messenger. As the demonstration concluded, Rix realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans had not just defeated their captors. They had transformed them. They had taken a ship full of predators and created a ship full of living warnings. Final lesson, Dan announced, looking directly at the security camera where he knew Rix was watching. Humans do not fight for conquest or territory or resources. We fight for principles, and when those principles are threatened, we do not stop fighting until the threat is eliminated or transformed. The lights went out one final time. When they returned, the 6 humans were gone, leaving behind only their handiwork. A ship full of reformed pirates and a message written on the wall in multiple languages. Class dismissed. Remember what you learned? Somewhere in the distance, Rix could hear the sound of shuttle engines igniting. The humans were finally leaving, but they were not fleeing. They were departing with the calm satisfaction of teachers who had successfully completed a difficult lesson. Behind them, they left evidence of humanity's true nature. Not monsters, not saints, but something far more complex and terrifying. They left proof that humans were capable of anything when properly motivated, including mercy that was more frightening than any cruelty. The rescue ships arrived 12 hours after the humans departed, their bright lights cutting through the darkness of the dying Bloodclaw vessel. Rick should have felt relief as the cutting tools freed him from his chains, but all he could feel was a numbness that went deeper than his exhausted body. The rescue team was led by Captain Morris of the Human Colonial Defense Force. He was a professional soldier with kind eyes and a gentle manner that reminded Rick's of every human diplomat he had ever met. The same humans who had just demonstrated capabilities that would haunt Rick's dreams forever. "Are you injured?" Captain Morris asked, helping Rick's down from the viewing platform where he had been chained for nearly a month. "No," Rick's replied, though he was not sure that was true. His body was intact, but something inside him had been broken by what he had witnessed. "Can you tell me what happened here?" Morris continued, his voice carefully neutral. Rick's looked around the arena that had become his prison. The walls still bore stains that told the story of human transformation, from victims to something far more dangerous. Security cameras hung broken and sparking. The air still smelled of fear and change. "Your people," Rick said slowly. "They fought back." Morris nodded. "Yes, we tracked their shuttle to a human colony 3 systems away. They're safe now, receiving medical and psychological evaluation." He paused, studying Rick's expression. "But that's not what you mean, is it?" The human rescue teams worked efficiently through the ship, documenting everything they found. The reformed blood claws were taken into custody, though Rick's noticed they went willingly, almost eagerly. They seemed grateful to be captured by beings who represented order and civilization. Commander Grex was found in his quarters, sitting quietly and staring at nothing. When the humans approached him, he immediately surrendered and began reciting what sounded like a memorized confession. His transformation was so complete that the rescue team's medical officer recommended immediate psychological evaluation. "The humans did this?" Morris asked after receiving the medical report. "Yes," Rix whispered, "but not the way you think." During the long journey back to Centauri Prime, Rix tried to explain what he had witnessed to the human rescue crews. They listened politely, took notes, and exchanged glances that suggested they thought he was suffering from trauma-induced delusions. How could he make them understand? How could he explain that their own species had capabilities that terrified him more than any monster from the void? The humans he spoke with were kind, professional, and concerned for his welfare. They offered medical treatment, counseling, and transportation back to his home world. They seemed genuinely distressed by what the Blood Claws had done to him and his crew. They were exactly the sort of civilized beings that the Galactic Council had welcomed into their community. But Rix had seen what lay beneath that civilization. Back on Centauri Prime, his debriefing sessions went poorly. The Council investigators were sympathetic but skeptical. His own people, peaceful by nature and philosophy, could not comprehend his warnings about human potential for organized violence. "You were under tremendous stress," his superior explained patiently. "Trauma can cause the mind to exaggerate threats and create false memories. The humans you describe simply do not match our extensive diplomatic contact with their species." Rix's crewmates backed up his basic account of events, but none of them had been positioned to see what he had seen. Kale's species was naturally optimistic and focused on the positive aspects of their rescue. The insect beings processed trauma differently and had already moved on to other concerns. Only, Rix remained haunted by the memory of 6 humans transforming from victims into something that defied every assumption the galaxy had made about Earth's newest citizens. His final report was filed and classified as personal observations of traumatized witness. The Council noted his recommendations for increased security around human space but took no immediate action. After all, humans had been nothing but cooperative since first contact. But late at night, alone in his quarters, Rix worked on his real report. The one that would serve as a warning for future generations. Personal log, Captain Rix of the Centauri Diplomatic Corps, Day 127 post-rescue, he dictated to his private recorder. "I have been home for 3 months now and the nightmares continue. Not nightmares of what the Blood Claws did to us, but nightmares of what the humans are capable of doing when properly motivated." He paused, gathering his thoughts. How could he make anyone understand? The galaxy sees humans as we wish to see them. Peaceful traders, curious explorers, friendly neighbors who share our values of cooperation and mutual respect. We are not wrong about this. Humans are all of these things. Another pause. Outside his window, the peaceful lights of Centauri Prime's capital city twinkled in the evening air. His world had not known violence for over 1,000 years. But we are also not seeing the complete picture. Humans are apex predators who have learned to use tools, not just physical tools, but social, psychological, and strategic tools that other species have never developed because we never needed them. His voice grew quiet, almost whispered. They do not fight like animals. Animals fight from instinct, rage, or hunger. Humans fight from principle, and they are very good at it. They are patient. They are creative. They learn from every encounter and improve their methods. The recording device hummed quietly in the darkness. Most frightening of all, human concepts of mercy and justice are more complex than our own. We assume mercy means kindness, forgiveness, allowing harmful beings to continue existing without consequence. Human mercy is different. It means giving enemies opportunities to become better, while ensuring they can never cause harm again. Rix thought about Commander Grex, now living peacefully on his home world, completely incapable of violence but haunted every day by perfect memories of his victims' suffering. They did not simply defeat their captors, they transformed them. They turned enemies into messengers who will spend the rest of their lives warning others about the consequences of threatening human civilians. He stood and walked to the window, looking up at the stars where human ships traveled between worlds, carrying trade goods and diplomatic messages. The humans who saved us were the same species as the humans who broke the Bloodclaw pirate organization, kind of professional, civilized people who are also capable of warfare that transcends anything in our experience. His final words were barely audible. We invited them into our galaxy because we saw their potential for peace. We did not consider their potential for war. I pray we never give them reason to show us the difference. The recording ended. Rick sealed it in his personal files with instructions that it should be opened only in the event of major human conflict. He hoped it would never be needed. But somewhere in the back of his mind he could still hear Dan's voice echoing through the Bloodclaw ship. Humans do not fight for conquest or territory or resources. We fight for principles. And Rix wondered what would happen the day someone threatened those principles on a scale larger than a single pirate ship. The galaxy was vast and full of potential enemies. Someday someone would push humanity too far, and when that day came, Rix feared the lesson would be taught on a much larger classroom.